Dear friends, welcome to the channel The Eastern Front. Today we continue our story about the German corporal. Another part of his memories you will find in the description under this video. So let's start. 26 June 1941. In the morning there are no changes in the situation. It's still impossible to move to the other side of the river. There is simply nothing. The division headquarters received an order to force the Styr in the Lutsk area, despite the presence of large Russian tank forces there. Okay, we are going where we've ordered. We are going by ourselves. No infantry, no heavy artillery. The river will have to overcome on inflatable rafts. From the constant attacks of the enemy you can go crazy. It seems that Russian planes, mostly attack planes and bombers, appear out of nowhere, right out of the thickets. And everything happens in a matter of seconds. First, deafening explosions, then the dull shots of their side guns and machine guns, and finally the black, smelly smoke of explosions. After that, the groans and screams of the wounded and dying, and that's it. The end of the movie. And so it was 5 times on the way to Lutsk. Our losses are significant. We slowly enter the village, not forgetting to cover the flanks. In the center of the village there is an opportunity to rest, collect the wounded and have a snack. Our artillery and dive bombers did a great job in this town. A terrible sight is the city prison. Before leaving the city, the Bolshevik jailers stage a terrible bloodbath here. Over 100 people, men and women, were slaughtered like cattle. For the rest of my life I won't forget those chilling dead faces. In the meantime our people pulled out several Red Army soldiers and Jews from where they were trying to sit out. A brief salvo from a pistol and this rubble is already in heaven. Moving on with the support of tanks, we are slowly approaching the eastern part of the city. And then suddenly we see Russian tanks. And you cannot even deploy anti-tank guns, there is no time. Our tanks are following in battle order. We are on armor, hung with hand grenades, ready to suppress the Russian infantrymen. An hour after the battle, it's all over. The tanks are knocked out, the enemy's infantrymen have fled. But we also have losses of several tanks. I was just on one of them, and I was incredibly lucky that I don't get hooked. Such an episode is devilishly typical of this damned Eastern campaign. Our tanks are already far ahead. They are 40 kilometers away from here and are advancing on Lutsk. Lutsk was taken by our troops the day before in the morning, and the entire area around the city was cleared by German troops. And yet, where did the enemy suddenly have so many tanks and infantrymen? These Asian bastards are cunning and insidious. Every hour then a new surprise, piece of shit under your nose. But you don't feel safe anywhere here. Not an hour, not a minute, not a second of carelessness. No, I'm not a coward, that's for sure. The feeling of fear is unknown to me. Over the past few days, the Reds have shot several soldiers on motorcycles. They dragged the wounded from cars and subjected them to horrific bullying. Only then they finished them off. The rashness, recklessness of the behavior of the Russians is seen in the following example. This afternoon, when the Russian tanks appeared, the crew of one of our tanks climbed out onto the turret and tried to re-aim the cannon. When we returned, the tank was burning like a match. Some civilian guy hiding nearby set fire to our tank. He was of course seized and thrown onto a burning tank. In the evening, the activity of Russians, both on the ground and in the air, increased sharply. There are rumors that we are surrounded by enemy tanks. It's rubbish. The main thing is not to panic and wait. 27 June 1941. All night long, Russian guns pounded our positions. Another night without sleep and rest. By dawn, a whole flock of Russian fighters flew in, but there was little benefit from their shooting. We managed to hide in the trenches. Planes soared in the air like drunks. They were thrown to the right, then to the left, and we were shooting at them like crazy. We understood perfectly well what these streaks of them meant. They were sniffing out from above where our positions were. Then they will either subject us to intense targeted shelling, or heavier vehicles will appear and throw a dozen bombs on our trenches. Therefore we were told to change positions, which in itself is not so easy. We are under fire from the air. As expected, not even a few minutes have passed when a group of bombers appeared. Clouds of earth and turf shot up into the air for 40-50 meters. But as suddenly it all started, so it ended. There was a ghostly, unreal silence. Silence devouring our nerves, except from the groans of the wounded. What to expect now? The third and fourth waves that will turn our position into a mess. Minute after minute, but nothing happens. Even the enemy's fire seems to have subsided. A heavy machine gun rumbles for a while, then silence. What's happening? Why don't the Russians attack our group? But soon the answer came. Our infantrymen are following us in an accelerated march to help us. They are barely dragging themselves, because it's difficult to move quickly if you have already managed to run up to bloody currents. 28 June. In the morning, the remnants of our motorized units and, more importantly, the gunners arrive. But the most important of all, of course, is provisions. Military delivery vehicles are also arriving, so there will be fuel. It would have been difficult for us if only drops of gasoline remained in the tanks of our tanks at the time of the Russian attack. We are advancing, but there is no combat contact with the enemy. Enemy fighters constantly harass the columns of our military supply, but for some reason they don't dare to make serious attacks today. Apparently, because our guys from the machine gun company are with us today. It's nice to see how they draw the blue sky with their paired machine guns. Our military anti-aircraft gunners would be speechless if they received such. Russian fighters turn around and growling angrily with their engines go home. But their farewell salvo from the side guns cost us 2 wounded soldiers. 29 June. In the morning it turns out why the Russians left so hastily. We called for help from a group of Ukrainian soldiers hiding in the bushes. They no longer have any desire to continue fighting with us and are much more aware of the situation than we are. And what they told us with characteristic grins pleased us. The Russians are surrounded, and since the encirclement ring in the Dubna area is quite weak, they have begun to concentrate forces for the upcoming breakthrough. We arrive in Dubna in the evening by an accelerated march. There is not a single enemy soldier in the city. Earlier in the afternoon, the Russians, after futile attempts to hold the city, abandoned it. Before leaving, the Russians destroyed it, solid ruins. In the city jail, we found a pile of mutilated corpses. The so-called road check on the motorcycle with a sidecar almost cost us our lives. The Reds obviously trained their recruits well in terms of fire training. One of them hit our motorcycle with 3 soldiers from a distance of 150 meters. We were saved by helmets on our heads. If we hadn't worn them, we would definitely have been in trouble. The chances of survival were 3 to 100. Already at dusk, our artillery fired at the retreating Russians. Together with the 9th Panzer Division, we continued to pursuit of the retreating enemy forces. Tanks occupied the territory even in the dark. We followed them, covering the flanks. Those who had to cover the flanks in the war with the Bolsheviks will understand that we spent another night without sleep. 30th June. Contrary to expectations, the night passed quietly, even quietly judging by our standards. Over the past few days we have managed to get used to the noise and rumble. Fragments sometimes whistle in some places, and a small caliber rises fountains of earth right at our feet. The infernal scene is played out at 3 a.m. Apparently, our tanks have stumbled upon enemy forces. All through the Russians are nowhere to be seen. The sun is mercilessly scorching. My head is buzzing from the heat. I can barely move my legs and arms. The old man, Sergeant Major, seems to have the ability to read our thoughts. Who can no longer sit by the guns, can lie down and take a nap. People don't pay attention to where they are. They just fall to the ground where they were standing. Some people are even able to walk to the nearest barn, fall on the dirt floor there, and immediately pass out. When we wake up, it's evening, my stomach is rumbling. I praise our cook. Rudolf doesn't leave us even on the front line, and all through he was no less tired than us. He still cooked a noble meal for us while we were sleeping from pork. This meal was met with the cheers. It's clear that the cook is very flattered by our reaction. Immediately starting to eat, we even forgot that there were hundreds of corpses around. We barely had time to eat when something terrible happened. A shell from the damn 122mm gun, which systematically fired at us, landed in Franke's squad. When the cloud of smoke cleared, a nightmare appeared before our eyes. In this chaos, 8 corpses of our comrades lay among scattered shell boxes, twisted metal fragments and pools of blood. Franke himself was sitting in a trench half covered with earth, staring stupidly at hell all around. When we tried to dig him up, he barked at us. "What do you want from me? I'll stay with my guys." The poor guy was clearly not himself. He died soon after from blood loss. A fragment took off his arm. Life is comical. A single Russian shell blew our hold, and at the same time not a single shot was fired that night. 24 September 1941. Early in the morning, the field units received orders to begin cleaning up the city. We didn't close our eyes all night. Explosion after explosion. In our neighborhood, there is no single whole glass left in the houses. We were transferred to the suburb of Nikolskaya Bershigovka. We settled down in comfortable houses quite comfortably. God is my witness that we are not spoiled by anything but comfort. There were even chickens and premises, and soon everywhere above our makeshift barracks there was an appetizing smell of fried meat. For a few hours we decided to forget about the damn war. However, vigilance is necessary. You can't let the enemy catch you by surprise. Almost at midnight another terrible explosion followed. Plaster fell from the ceiling and walls, and in some places the blast wave knocked down the doors. We have a piece stuck in our throat. Dropping everything, we rushed out into the street like mad. Smoke hung over the city like a giant mushroom cloud. Apparently, something very serious has happened. We didn't even want to eat. No one touched the appetitively fried chickens. Everyone was depressed. We were looking forward to hearing about the night incident. It was only in the evening that I managed to find out something. Housed in the largest Kiev hotel, the command were blown up along with several other administrative buildings. The flames engulfed an entire city block. Several thousand residents of the city were under rubble. A lot of our people died, from ordinary soldiers to high-ranking officers. Someone said that the crowded Soldas casino was also blown up. It was terrible. For the first time, soldiers who have seen enough of the nightmare of the front are sitting in the hall, watching a movie, laughing as if nothing had happened, and suddenly an explosion. They are torn to pieces by a suddenly activated infernal mechanism. It couldn't be worse. 25th September. In the morning, 3 fighters and I went to Teremki. This event required special vigilance. The whole territory is literally stuffed with mines. Even now, when the fighting is in the past, our positions are far from safe. An ominous silence hangs over the field of death, and tons of dynamite are laid in the ground, waiting for just one wrong step or movement to throw out fire, smoke and death. Responsibility is a heavy burden. I should have gone alone at my own risk, but my comrades persuaded me, and I decided to take them with me. It's still gloomy here. The traces of recent battles remind of themselves, but there is a silence around. There is no whistling of shells and fragments. Who could have imagined such a thing a few days ago? Oh my god, what a panorama! In the Tereмкowski forest, the bodies of both our and the enemies are still lying almost close to each other. They have been lying here for a month and a half. Yes, this is what the Tereмкowski forest looks like now. Trees and corpses split by shells and shrapnel. The embodiment of the nightmare of war. Damn it, there is no need for a soldier to go here on excursions, to walk around this blood-soaked land, among wire fences on which scraps of uniforms still hang. Then we come to a huge pile of ruins. These are the Teremki. Everything around is very similar to the lunar landscape, craters and nothing else. And our positions were once here. When we come to where our comrades buried, the earth has sunk in some places. In general, it's difficult to recognize something. It would seem that here we dug a grave, put them in it, poured a mound over it, and now, instead of a mound, a depression filled with muddy water. God, what a blessing that their relatives and friends don't see all this nightmare. Yes, once upon a time there were actually our positions here. Thousands of fragments have destroyed them almost to the ground. Now we can only stand and guess how the trenches were laid, where the trenches were dug. It doesn't fit in your head that you once ran around them, slept in them, lay curled up for 2 days, waiting for the next enemy artillery attack. It also doesn't fit into my head that someone was lucky enough to escape from this hell alive. We drive back, we are silent, everyone is lost in thought. Goodbye Teremki, goodbye our comrades in arms. It's hard to remember this place. Is it possible to forget the horrors experienced here? We are approaching the burning cave shrouded in a giant clouds of smoke. Unhappy city, we spared you, perhaps even to our own detriment, and now giant fires are raging here. Your body is convulsing from terrible explosions. When will the end of this terrible war come? A lot of people say that I see the world only in black. No, my dear, it's not. In front of, I see everything now in white, the color of snow which will bury very many of you. 26 September. The city center for many kilometers is a raging ocean of flames. Fires are devouring the city. 2 more urban areas had to be evacuated this morning. As a result, about 20,000 people were left homeless. About half of them, taking with them the most necessary things, huddle in houses on nearby streets. A depressing sight. This morning the sappers also blew up part of the streets. It was simply impossible to do without it. The SS Sonder commanders have their hands full. Round-the-clock interrogations and shootings. Even those who seem to them just suspicious are put against the wall right on the streets, and the bodies of the dead are left lying there. People, men, women, children, walk around and whisper nothing, in the sense of nothing special. Well, just think, a corpse is lying on the sidewalk. So what? We walk right through puddles of blood. There are traces of blood everywhere, on the side walls, fresh and already caked. The SS Einsatz commanders also has a lot of work. All Jew, without exception, must register before noon on the 25th. Of course, not everyone followed this order, but at most half. But in any case, none of them will leave the city. Kiev is surrounded by a dense ring of guards. It will be a day of revenge for our comrades who died from the explosions of treacherously planted mines. Today, a day later, 2,000 Jews have already been sent to heaven. We had a long conversation with the young SS soldier from the special team. They are engaged in liberating all the major cities we have taken from the Jewish population. They know their job perfectly well. These guys are killers with experience. I'm amazed. We frontline soldiers didn't even think about what was happening in the cities. We just continued to pursue the retreating enemy and went further. A task of a frontline soldier is forward and only forward. Drive the enemy as far as possible. An SS soldier told me about mass shootings in Zhytomyr. For 2 days they dug 50 meters ditches at the rate of 250 Jews per month. In total we killed 1,800 Jews in Zhytomyr. Another 5,000 were killed earlier. Then it was already on the 3rd day, and everyone, from small children to very old, had to strip naked. The first 250 Jews were put on the edge of the moat, then a queue of 2 machine guns at once. After that, the next group was brought to the moat. This had to go down and carefully lay the dead side by side, more tightly, so that there was more space. If there were gaps between the corpses, they were filled with murdered children. In general, there was no time to linger. There should have been 1,500 of them, and all had to fit in the moat. Then machine gun burst again, and if someone else continued to mourn, they were finished off. Then the next group was in line, and so it continued until the evening. There wasn't enough time for all of them, because there are so many Jews in this country. At first I couldn't say a word at all. This young man talked about everything as if it were an ordinary hunt. I couldn't believe it, so I told him so. Grinning, he offered to go and see for himself. After getting on our bikes, we rode to the city outskirts to a steep ravine. I'll try to be brief, my stomach felt strangely cold. What I saw was terrible, and I will not forget this terrible picture for the rest of my life. Jews were standing on the edge of this ravine, and soldiers lying behind the machine guns were shooting them down. The bodies of the dead fell over the edge of this ravine 50 meters down. Everyone who stood at the edge was swept clean. When the number of dead exceeded 1,000 people, the edge of the ravine was undermined, and the pile of dead bodies at the bottom was filled up with earth. And they came up with a good idea with explosion. My interlocutor smiled in a completely boyish way. Oh my God, without saying a word, I turned around and walked briskly, almost running towards the city. This soldier is 19 years old. After all, such events leave traces not only on the form but also in the soul. What will happen to him when he gets home? To your mother and fiancé. Dear friends, that's all for today. It was Tim and the Eastern Front channel, and as usual, I wish you peace and health. If you like the video, then support it with a like and the channel with a subscription. See you!